Hi, and thank you so much for joining me here today. This data is part of a larger ongoing longitudinal study at the Rotman Research Institute of Baker's Hospital in Toronto on early at-risk aging. Aging impacts the flexible use of spatial frames of reference, what we typically refer to as egocentric, or from a subject-to-object first-person perspective, and allocentric, or from an object-to-object perspective, typically map-based. This impact can be seen in the context of both spatial memory and navigation. An ongoing debate, however, is whether this impairment is simply part of normal, healthy aging, or is a sign of an early at-risk stage of neurocognitive decline, even before the clinical diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment. This discrepancy also makes it unclear whether, as some literature suggests, it is the allocentric frame of reference that is most impacted, or whether the need for switching between frames of reference in mind is also affected. So we were interested in whether memory for object locations across these spatial frames of reference is sensitive to early cognitive and brain-based changes in the medial temporal lobes expected with at-risk aging. To do this, we designed a 3D desktop virtual reality object location task using OpenMaze in Unity. We had 30 older adult participants complete the task along with the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, or MoCA. Over 2 separate sessions, participants learned 5 unique object locations within 6 everyday scenes, either in an allocentric frame of reference, which you should be able to see on your screen now, or an egocentric frame of reference, an example of which you can see on your screen right now. Now, participants went through a lengthy training task phase before completing the actual task. During the learning phase, participants used the arrow keys on the keyboard to either navigate from a first-person perspective or navigate an icon representing their place on a map. They would pick up each object by touching it 3 times in a row to facilitate learning. Next, in the testing phase, participants would be asked to recall the object locations in both an allocentric and an egocentric frame of reference, the order of which was counterbalanced across participants. So overall, we had 4 task conditions, based on the learning phase frame of reference and the testing phase frame of reference: allocentric, 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 egocentric, egocentric, allocentric, and egocentric, egocentric. To measure memory accuracy, we use Euclidean distance in Unity virtual meters from the target location to the participant's response. We used a linear mixed effects model to compare condition by MoCA score with a subject random intercept and found an interaction whereby in all but one condition, MoCA scaled with task performance significantly. Specifically, in this group of older adults, we found that cognitive status, as measured by the MoCA, predicted performance in all task conditions except for the allocentric one. That would be the condition where participants learned on a map and tested on a map. So if we look at the graph in the center, we can see that a lower MoCA score is associated with more error in the other 3 task conditions. Keep in mind, a MoCA score below 26 is generally suggested to be in an at-risk range for an individual who does not yet qualify for a clinical diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment. What's really interesting in these findings is that these 3 significant task conditions all include a 3-dimensional egocentric frame of reference at either learning, testing, or both phases. Yet previous literature tends to find an impairment in an allocentric frame of reference for older adults. We might explain this difference through a precision and binding model of spatial memory. In 2 of the significant conditions, a switch between an egocentric and allocentric frame of reference was needed to perform accurately in remembering object locations. In the final condition, the egocentric one, it is highly likely that to perform accurately, participants needed to relationally bind in mind the object locations into a precise cognitive allocentric-like map between the learning and testing phase. In other words, trying to maintain the object locations in an egocentric frame of reference is far less efficient in memory relative to an allocentric, relationally bound map. Finally, I want to draw your attention to the rightmost panel of my poster. Since this study is part of a larger ongoing longitudinal study, many of the subjects tested had previously undergone a structural MRI at the first time point. I want to sincerely thank Drs. Rosanna Olsen and Lock-In Young, who originally manually segmented the gray matter volumes for these participants. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the two regions that were associated with error collapsing across all task conditions were the right posterior hippocampus and the right anterolateral entorhinal cortex. Both these regions are critically involved in spatial memory and have been found to be impacted early on in at-risk aging. Interestingly, no other regions in the medial temporal lobes showed this effect. We're currently in the process of manually segmenting neurostructural images from the second time point of the larger study, so please stay tuned for a follow-up. Taken together, high-precision object location memory across spatial frames of reference is sensitive to the cognitive and medial temporal lobe changes associated with early at-risk aging. This avenue of research holds a promising future in developing 3D desktop spatial memory tasks to detect early signs of mild cognitive impairment.